dear viewers, and welcome to a new edition of our program Africa Today. In today's edition, we are going to shed light about the important summit and the participation of U.S. African leaders at the U.S. African Summit, which is held in Washington from the 13th till the 15th of December. President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi arrived to Washington to participate in the U.S. African Summit that is being held in Washington, D.C. from the 13th till the 15th of December. The significance of the summit goes beyond the wish of U.S. to help Africa pursue development, security, and even possibly some form of other political development and political cooperation. It is more about the battle over Africa and the world order that is now being slowly developed, in which the supremacy of the U.S. in international politics is receiving in favor of up-and-coming world powers like China.
President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi arrived in Washington to take part in the U.S. African Summit hosted by U.S. President Joe Biden. Presidential spokesman Ambassador Bassam Radi stated that the president intends to focus during the summit on topics of interest to African countries in light of the existing global challenges, strengthening the African-American partnership to confront the food security crisis and facilitate the integration of African countries into the global economy to benefit from the opportunities and advantages it provides in achieving economic growth, transferring technology, and pushing the movement of foreign investment. Radi added that the president's visit program to the U.S. includes holding meetings with a number of U.S. senior officials to boost the bilateral ties in order to achieve the two countries' mutual interests, as well as discussing the regional and international files with mutual concern. The president is expected to hold meetings with U.S. businessmen to enhance means of cooperation in the fields of economics, trade, and investments. On the sidelines of the summit, the president will also meet with a number of heads of state and governments participating in the summit to enhance the bilateral cooperation and discuss various regional and international issues. Development and security are on the agenda of this second U.S.-Africa Summit meeting that U.S. President is hosting for the first time in 8 years after the convocation of the first in the U.S. Capitol in 2014. Other issues on the agenda include matters related to the role of civil society and good governance. In press statements ahead of the summit, which is taking place with the participation of 49 African leaders, U.S. officials said that it was about a new partnership with Africa whereby Washington will engage more with African countries and also be more aware of the fact that these countries don't have to choose between working with the U.S. and working with other world powers, especially China.
U.S. African Leaders Summit was inaugurated by spotlighting Africa's youthful population that will inevitably lead it to become key global player in decades to come. U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris offered an optimistic thread at the start of the Biden administration's three-day gathering that's bringing in leaders from 49 African countries and the African Union for high-level talks. Harris also announced that the administration would invest an additional $100 million to expand the Young African Leaders Initiative. More details in the following story.
U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris on Tuesday opened the U.S. Africa Leaders Summit in Washington by spotlighting Africa's youthful population, making the case that the continent's demographics will inevitably lead to become a key global player in the decades to come. Harris offered the optimistic thread at the start of the Biden administration's three-day gathering that's bringing in leaders from 49 African nations and the African Union for high-level talks. The vice president also announced that the administration would invest an additional $100 million to expand the Young African Leaders Initiative, and that the U.S. Export-Import Bank was entering new memorandums of understanding that will clear the way for $1 billion in new commercial financing in Africa. The vice president's appearance at the forum was one in a series of events designed to showcase U.S. interest in and commitment to Africa after years of what some officials have lamented was a lack of involvement in a continent that has increasingly become a battleground for global influence between the U.S. and China. U.S. President Joe Biden, who is set to meet leaders on Wednesday, signed an executive order establishing the President's Advisory Council on African Diaspora Engagement. The African diaspora includes nearly 2 million African immigrants, as well as many African American descendants of enslaved people who have close connections to the continent. Even before the summit began, the White House announced Biden's support for the African Union becoming a permanent member of the group of 20 nations, and said it had appointed Johnny Carson, a well-regarded veteran diplomat with decades of experience on the continent, to serve as point person for implementing initiatives. And Biden is expected to announce before the end of the summit that he will make a multi-country visit to Africa next year, according to a U.S. official who spoke on the condition of anonymity before the announcement of the trip.
To shed more light on this very important issue, we are very much delighted to be joined over the phone by Dr. Mohammed Amer, Coordinator of International Relations and Conferences. Dr. Amer, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, sir, for being with us. Sir, U.S. President Biden is hosting leaders from across the African continent in Washington, D.C. from the 13th till the 15th of December for the U.S. African Leaders Summit. Can you shed more light about the importance of this summit?
Okay, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to speak to the Egyptian television in the beginning. It's safe to say that the Afro-American relations are deeply steeped in the history of international relations between the two titanic regions, you know, Africa and America. Yes. So both regions have their own interests in each other. As the African continent would like to benefit from the technological and even the financial advancement that America keeps achieving every single day. And on the other hand, Africa is a source of great opportunity and resources, according to America. So the summit also comes in a time that the world itself needs integrity and cooperation to face the challenges of the Russian-Ukrainian war. And it looks like the USA is looking for different allies around the world to stand firm against the Russian and even the Chinese expansion.
Yes. Dr. Amer, President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi arrived yesterday at Washington, D.C. to participate in the summit. The importance of Egypt's participation and the attendance of President al-Sisi to this summit. How do you see the importance of the President's participation?
This is very important because, as you know, stemming from Egypt's pride of its African roots and its unprecedented focus on reviving its older relations with the African countries, which is deeply steeped within the thinking of the Egyptian state itself. As you remember, Egypt has managed during COP27 to bring billions of US dollars to the African continent itself through reaching the, as you remember, the preliminary agreement of the loss and damage fund, which will bring different opportunities and investments to green energy and different opportunities to the most vulnerable countries in the African continent. I believe this comes along with the different efforts offered by the Egyptian state itself and His Excellency President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, who also presents the African continent, the whole African continent, and such a summit in international events, as late there, of course.
Yes, sir. Sir, also the presidential spokesperson, Ambassador Bassem Radi, said that the president intends to focus during attendance of the summit on the issues that are of main concern to the African continent in light of the current international challenges, boosting the African-American partnership to confront the food security crisis and to facilitate the merge of the African countries into the world economy. What's your take on these very important points?
Yeah, of course. And by the way, this was the mechanism of the thinking of the Egyptian state towards the African continent and even the African-American relations. As we remember, Dr. Hala Said, our planning minister, who once said that the national agenda for sustainable development here in Egypt in 2030 is highly compatible with the Africa Agenda in 2063 and UN SDGs. And this refers to the implementation of the first phase of the national program for the socio-economic reform and outlining the second phase, which is the structural reform. And this includes agricultural, food security, water security. We can also focus on the national program itself for the structural reform, which includes short-term, medium-term, and even long-term procedures, which are based on a number of pillars or axes, demographics, financial performance, logistics, governance, and so on. And let us not forget about the idea to turn the initiative Haya Karima, or Decent Life, into an African one. As you remember, in the last COP27, we focused on this, and we announced that we may turn Decent Life into an African, into the African continent, which is an ambitious project to develop the African countryside and even countries in Africa by transforming these countries into sustainable communities, which reduces the rate of poverty here.
Yes, indeed. Dr. Amer, how do you view here the timing of hosting the United States for this summit? And do you agree that the summit is holding a critical situation here, or it was held at a critical timing when the international developments are imposing remarkable challenges on the countries of the whole world?
Yeah, the timing of the summit itself, I believe, is so smart, because it comes in the aftermath of the Chinese-Arab summit, which was held in Riyadh a few days ago. China has been looking for permanent interests within the Middle East region, and it looks like America got jealous because it includes certain African countries from the Arab world. And in response, the United States would like to balance the weight in the same region by wooing the African countries with unprecedented opportunities, as we expect from the summit. It's like a political game in which each party is a winning party, China and America and Africa itself. But let us not forget how America and how they changed their thinking and strategies imposed by the Democrat administration itself, which proves to be maybe radical in its choices to be the positive of the meaning of the word. They are radical, but for the good of it. It's not a bad thing.
Yes. Sir, actually the United States warned that China and Russia were actually, according to what they said, destabilizing Africa with their growing inroads as it rolled out the red carpet to the continent's leaders and pledged billions of dollars to support. How do you see this statement which was issued by the United States ahead of the start of the summit?
Yeah, of course, this is very important, and you can hear the impressive news by Joe Biden himself, or the administration of Joe Biden, which approved the admission of the African Union itself to the G20, which is very impressive, because after long years of negligence and international focus, the African continent finally gets back to the picture and to the game. Maybe such an announcement is undoubtedly the White House itself trying to show a gesture of goodwill to Africa. Washington cannot conceal its strategic intention of using the support as leverage to engage in fiercer global competition with China in Africa. But by the end of the day, it's a very positive movement by the United States administration towards the African continent, of course. And it's one of the best.
Sir, that would bring me to ask here, to what extent, as you have kindly mentioned, do you see the return of the United States here to the image of supporting the African continent after a long time of being out of the picture to a great extent?
Yeah, of course. And you can see this as a new strategy by the United States administration, and you can focus on certain regions here in Africa. There is a new strategy toward the Sub-Saharan Africa, which was released in the last August, as I remember. Biden administration explicitly highlights how Africa plays a role as one of the largest regional voting groups at the United Nations. And after multilateral bodies, this was one of the first provers given by Joe Biden. In other words, the United States itself needs Africa's support on major international affairs to achieve a larger geopolitical goal, to undermine China's cooperation with Africa, and then to undermine also the Russian impact here in Africa. This is very important for the administration in this time.
Yes. Sir, also the Biden administration has been careful not to present Africans with an us or them choice, believing it might be futile to try to turn the tide on the Chinese massive infrastructure spending. How do you see the image from here? Can we witness more change of the attitude from the United States administration regarding this issue? Or what would be the reaction of the Chinese regarding this? How do you see the image here, which is quite tricky?
I believe the movement given by the United States itself, it was a reaction. It was not an action, because the action was given by the Chinese and Russian party. And after the Chinese Arab summit last week, or even a few days ago, the reaction came very, very quickly by the United States itself. Because this time, I think they are really committed to showing a goodwill gesture and the cooperation here in the African continent. They do not dare to lose the importance or the vitality of the African continent, because you have lost a lot of pillars and axes around the world, and you cannot forget or lose this one. I think this is a very smart move by the administration of Joe Biden.
Yes, indeed, a very important summit taking place in Washington. Dr. Mohammed Amer, coordinator of the International Relations and Conferences. Thank you so much, sir, for your precious input. And we will go to watch this feature report about the Barack Obama, who welcomed the African leaders to Washington in 2014. Many viewed the summit as historic, not just due to the U.S. President's background, but the pledges to make the partnership deeper and such events routine. The first U.S. African Leaders Summit announced private sector commitments to invest in and partner with African countries on initiatives in energy, financial services, climate change, food security, and health care, among others. This year's summit is expected to prioritize the similar issues while placing an even greater emphasis on bilateral trade and investment.
About 50 African leaders are expected to join U.S. President Joe Biden for a series of meetings over 3 days starting Tuesday, in which the U.S. is expected to discuss the African Union's role with India, the G20 president for 2023. The first U.S. Africa Leaders Summit, which was held in 2014 under the then President Barack Obama, announced private sector commitments to invest in and partner with African countries on initiatives in energy, financial services, climate change, food security, and healthcare, among others. This year's summit is expected to prioritize similar issues while placing an even greater emphasis on bilateral trade and investment. The summit will include new initiatives to increase U.S. engagement with the African continental free trade area, as well as to boost the continent's COVID-19 recovery, bolster food security, and promote investment in infrastructure, health, and renewable energy projects. Activities during the summit will include a civil society day, a business day, and a leaders day. There will also be an American-African Business Forum jointly organized by the U.S. Department of Commerce, the American Chamber of Commerce, and the African Business Council in cooperation with the Prosperity Initiative for African Trade and Property. USABF will focus on promoting two-way trade and investment cooperation to strengthen Africa's role in the global economy.
Well, with that, our dear viewers, we come to the end of this edition of our program Africa Today. Thank you so much for being with us. And for more news and updates, follow us on www.nileinternational.net. I'm Maestri Rabia signing off.